Today is Thursday, January 11th, 2024. This is the Town Finance Committee meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order. Those present are myself, Councilor Shoup, and Councilor Cushing. Item number 3 is approval of minutes from our December 14th, 2023 meeting. Can I get a motion?
Second?
Any discussion?
No.
All those in favor? Right. Item number 4 is discussion on the following topics. So we have a few topics to discuss today. The first one I want to start with is the budget review process. So this was one of the items that we discussed at our last meeting where we felt like it would be good to have a little bit of a conversation on changes we'd like to see in the schedule or the process for the budget. We have the school finance committee represented today with Carolyn Gammon from the school board and Kate Bolton from the finance department. So you guys are welcome to come up to the table if you would like to participate in the conversation. In case anything impacts you guys, or if there's ideas or things you guys have about process improvements or things you want to see this next cycle. I think because we're about to really kind of get into budget, it's important that we give staff some direction so that they can build that into the plan accordingly. So we'll have that conversation first, and then we'll go to Alger Hall financial goals and then look at the calendar. So with that, just opening it up for discussion from the counselors, if you have any specific thoughts you want to put out for discussion.
On 2000 budget review process.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, I think I had shared my feelings at the last meeting that I felt, I mean, I was new to the budget process last year, but it did felt very broken up for me, where I personally feel more beneficial. It would be more beneficial for me if it was kind of more together and not spread out so much. I felt like it was spread out over like almost 6 weeks almost with the meetings with the different departments. And so I think to really get a hold on information personally, it would be better for me to have it all done in a smaller time frame.
So Karen, you're suggesting kind of budget day, as I recall, is that right? Sort of a marathon of presentations.
Whatever works for staff, but ultimately, I mean, John and I do work full time, but maybe a couple afternoons of just meetings
Yeah,
or
I
something
think
like that.
to me, a couple afternoons makes more sense. I think that particularly from the standpoint of fairness, if you're coming in and presenting and you're last on the list for your thing that you really care about, I can tell you if I'm one of your listeners after 8 hours, I'm probably not as favorably disposed as I might have been when we started. So I think probably my liking, if we could do it, in 2 4 to 5 hour sessions with appropriate breaks, that would work for me.
So I really like how the school does it when they do the meetings for the board. I think what we're discussing is exactly what they do is they hold 2 half-day sessions in the same week so that they can hear from every department. And I think that's what we're saying would be helpful for the council or for this committee would be if we can find time in a week where we can have 2 half-day sessions perhaps and just make sure we cover all the topics in that week. So that way we're getting that information. And then I think what I like about that, if we can build it in earlier, is it then allows us more time to kind of dig in, discuss things at a deeper level and hear back more from the community on things that they have questions on that we may need to dig into. So I like that concept of like 2 half days. I can be flexible as long as we get them scheduled in terms of my work schedule to try and make sure I can get off work if we wanted to do something from like noon to 5 those days or something like that.
Did that work for you guys in the school? Did you like that format?
Yeah, so last year was my first year doing it, and I thought it worked extremely well. Kate puts together a great book, and it's very well laid out. And it has talking points for, what did we accomplish in the current year? What are we looking to accomplish in the upcoming year? And some highlights to some of that, whether it's staffing or increases, decreases in numbers. So she does a beautiful job, and it's worked, in my opinion, worked very well last year. You probably have a little more history on this.
Yeah, I'm always the old lady in the room.
I can relate to that.
So to your point, Counselor Cushing, we did, when we first started doing this some years ago, we did try to do a marathon session all in one day. I think we did a Saturday. You're absolutely right. By the end of that day, we did it a couple of years that way, and it was just people were tapped out because you're listening at a level of intensity and learning a lot of new material, that it just wasn't effective. So we did split it into 2 days. Exactly what you guys are describing. For me, the benefit of it is having everyone in the same room at the same time. Now, our team is a little different. Obviously, you have much bigger departments presenting to you and probably a larger cast of characters, but the ability for our entire leadership team to discuss budget impacts that cross over multiple departments or that have, similar trends going on in different areas. That's been really fruitful for us, I think, and just having everybody in the same room so that questions can be asked and everyone can hear it.
It's still a lot of information.
It is a
to-
lot, yeah.
To digest in 2 days, but,
But I think
do it well.
to Counselor Anderson's
Yep.
point, then you have the ability to say, okay, I've heard these things. Now I need more information. I want to
Yeah.
go back and dig a little bit deeper into, these particular topics that I don't feel like we covered sufficiently.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's a good point. I had another thought. With a little story, as I happen want to do. I have a friend who is a lawyer, a CPA, and an MBA, and a forensic accountant. A nerd, let's just say. And when I looked over the first set of budget documents, by the way, I have an MBA, and I'm not unfamiliar with financial documents. But I have to say that municipal accounting is its own animal. And I think that if one of the things that we're trying to accomplish is give people voice, input, and that sort of thing, it would be really helpful to me if we could find some ways of just simplifying the top line. I'm not suggesting getting rid of the detail, but I reread the 24 budget this year, and I get lost in it. And I think I see some heads nodding back there. And from my thinking, all of that detail is absolutely necessary for the people who are going to manage the pennies, and we expect them to be managing those pennies. But broadly, and I see all the information there. But one of the things I really want to know is how much discretionary spending is really in the budget, and I don't want to have to look as hard to find that. And I'd like to be able to say to constituents, look, in this big ball of $42 million or whatever it is on the town side, how much of that are we really controlling here? And if we are, where are the opportunities to reduce spending? And I'm not suggesting that we can or should in certain areas, but I'd at least like to know where the levers are. And I'd like to know if, from a standpoint of priorities, if there are places where we may be faced with trade-offs. So if we say, well, we're looking for a 3% increase target, then to hit that, we may have to say, well, if we really want to do this and stay within that parameter, we have to change this. Again, I have no preconceived notions about where we're going or how we're going. But when my friend Stephen comes in thinking that he's going to explain all of this, and he said, I'm feeling like I need to go home and write a cross-tab dictionary because I can't quite make out where the income statement, balance sheet, and trial balances and all of this stuff. And again, that's not because there's anything wrong with it. It's because it's its own animal. That's my point. So with all due respect, Norm, because I know you're on it, okay? It's just that I'm not.
Well, I would just add, I always feel like Tom's presentation and Jeff's presentation of the budget does a great job storytelling and giving kind of the executive overview. So I think maybe one thing I would suggest is looking at, if you haven't already, look at that presentation or watch the last one to kind of see, are there other things that we would suggest to Tom to help tell that more top line
Yeah.
story?
Yeah, I certainly will.
Yeah, and I also agree though, like I feel like what would be nice in the sessions would also be to like carry that story, that same story forward by department, meaning like to your point, you know, a couple things I would like to see us put more focus on, and I think we do it, but looking at the survey, it's just making me think, one, we need to probably do more talking about the accomplishments and what we've achieved with the investments we made the prior year and just kind of shout that a little bit more. In the survey, it kind of talked to how, you know, everybody's pretty satisfied with the services, but they feel like the value they're paying in taxes for the services is really low. So I think we have a real opportunity in the budget process to, before we jump into next year, really kind of take some time, celebrate the successes and of what the previous year investments have done for our community, and really try and bring people along with that as like the starting point. So that's something, I think we do that, but I just feel like we need to make a more concerted effort to tell that story. Also along kind of your same train of thought, like, you know, digging into the details is important. I think we will, but you know, there's like a middle ground to your point of before we get in the weeds, like, can we talk about things more by like looking at the budget as, or like especially the department costs or even the overall costs by certain spend categories that help to really frame it in a different way. So like if it's you know, FTE, human capital, compensation, benefits, all of those line items, like that's one category. And then there are other categories of spend I think we have that, again, to your point, will kind of show us where's the discretion, because our staff costs or costs that go up because of union contracts, in my mind, that's like mandatory spend that we're committed to. That's not really discretionary. That's part of the
Right.
next budget year, but there are things in there that are more discretionary, to your point, that knowing like what's the growth in the discretionary and what are we doing? What are the investment choices we're making?
That's exactly right. I think, Tom, I think some communication you made recently, you correctly made the point that what makes this town tick is really good people, and really good people are going to cost more. And I think, and that's certainly true on the teacher side. And some of our staff have unions representing them very, very well. And consequently, we have negotiation and so forth. And then there are other folks either here or who need to be here, who we sort of have to recruit out of the general community. And it would be a really good idea to know in the area of people, what additional investment do we need to make to keep our skill set as sharp as it is? So, and I think that we talked a little bit last time about the differences between capital spending, which is basically keeping the act sharp. It's making sure that we have fire trucks and computers and those kinds of things that are assets that have totally depreciated. And then there's another category of spending in which we want to invest to move some particular ball forward. And I think in the last year's budget, there was a list of those things. I can't remember exactly what they were, but we talked about making sure that we clearly differentiate between those two types of spending, because one, I think, is sort of in the same category as people. If you don't maintain your human and capital assets, then you're going to go backwards. The question is, where are we going forwards, and what investments do we need to make in those areas?
Can I jump in?
Yes, you may. Sure.
So, yes, Councillor Cushing, I agree with you. So in the budgets, when I prepare for the businesses I've worked for over the years, it's the people that make things run and work well. So what I like to do when I'm preparing a budget is, one, I do like a reconciliation of FTEs. Where did we end? Where do we expect to end the year? What are we adding? What are we decreasing? And what's the total expected FTE? And then basically do the same thing on total salaries and benefits. And what are we adding? and, what might be going away. And then the same thing with the other non-salary benefit expenses. What are the things that we're adding this year and what's the overall value? This is more like executive summary
Yeah.
level.
I think
And,
that's,
yeah, just exactly what you're saying. What are we adding? Why? And maybe, where are we able to save? Some of those, just some of those bigger, higher level items and just give you a good idea.
Yeah.
Counselor Shoup, any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I sat through the budget process last year. It was my first time. I thought it went, I thought it was great. I mean, as someone who's new to finance, I didn't really feel extremely confused. I didn't dig into the indices in the back, I guess, per se. I think you have a good point of, I think it's good to emphasize the good from the year. I really appreciated, I think most of the departments came forward and were very cognizant of council goals, which again, I'm new as a counselor, so I don't know if that's normal, but for me, I thought that was awesome to see every single department really acknowledging kind of what our goals were that year. So I would imagine that's going to continue.
Yeah, I like that. And the year before, when we first did the survey, it was more reflecting on the community survey results. And so I think it's gonna be like, I think Tom had already said, this year it's gonna be both, where for any new investments, really kind of talking to how those new investments are either aligned to the goals or aligned to addressing opportunities in the survey that can help improve satisfaction with residents. So to me, those are like, especially when people are talking about the why behind the requests, trying to map it to those. And I'm sure the board will have something similar that they would look to their staff to align to. So I think what I'm hearing between you two, and I agree, it's like more like, again, some executive summaries that really kind of highlight some key things. And I don't think that's necessarily in the budget book, but maybe more in the presentations by departments where they can kind of give that type of executive review. And maybe that's something we can work with Norm or someone to help templatize
I
a
mean, I
little bit.
feel like last year they did a very good job, and I could specifically remember like the fire department. I mean, to me, I'm saying continue what you did last year. I think they did great.
Yeah.
I think a couple of them just really pulled it together. I think I remember the fire department really.
Karen, to your point, I understood the stuff that I was reading, but I found it really hard to keep it in my head as a whole picture. And I think I actually said that in my campaign statement. I said, I've read the budget. All this stuff sounds good to me. Okay. And at the same time, I have this sense that somewhere in there are probably opportunities for savings, and someplace there may be places that for investment that we're missing. And so that's sort of the duality of the whole thing, is that when you read it, it's tight.
Yeah.
It's, it's hard to find anything wrong with it. And I think in one sense, it's not so much finding fault with it, but I think that the community, as I understand it, wants us to take a, sharp look at this stuff, and in some cases, make some hard choices.
Yeah.
I don't mind doing that, so.
Yeah, and I think to your point, a budget is about a series of choices and choices that reflect our values as a community. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and I agree, is like for staff to give us opportunity to see those choices and offer thoughts. Meaning like one thing that I think, again, that the school does well that I appreciate in your budget book is like you always talk about unfunded investments. And I think, Tom, this past year, you actually put forward some that all became funded, because once we knew that they were put forward, we were like, those are important. It was the vulnerability assessment and the open space plan. And so again, I think we want to encourage staff and you, Tom, as well, to give us the budget that you think is the right budget based on, whatever goal we set, and then give us options so that we can talk about where we may want to make additional investments. So that way the conversation, like I don't like the conversation when it comes to where do we cut. I want it to be a conversation about give us a starting point and then give us options to then add on to build the budget that we think is going to help us best meet the goal and best meet the policy objectives of the community. So however we can think about how we frame things and present them, like I want to know what didn't make the cut so that we can have a conversation of, well, that seems really important. And if we were to fund that, what would the suggestion be from staff or you, Tom, in terms of what you think would that right trade-off would be, so that we can really make sure that we're building something that we all feel is reflecting priorities of the community. Any-
And question,
Yeah.
and where does the part where if the council looks at the stuff that isn't there and the stuff that is there and then says, but there's something else that should be there, where does that come in the
So
process?
that can happen either as we're reviewing the departments. I mean, ultimately that if something's presented at first read and we want to add something in, that would be an amendment that we would propose, and it would just have to be discussed by the council as part of an amendment that would be proposed. And again, the committee could have those conversations. We could be the place where we say, hey, we didn't fund this type of thing. We think it's a good idea, and
Right.
we can make those recommendations as a body to the council and offer it as an amendment. And we might identify some things as we work through each department. I know what's happened in the past, from my experience, has been sometimes like when we look at like the CIP or other things, we may have a different view on prioritization. And so there's been the past where we've moved things up and funded them earlier in the budget year because we felt like that made more sense given
Mhm.
other things that were going on. And so that's the opportunity for this committee. And so I think, again, those conversations can happen with the departments to start, but as we go through those and have subsequent conversations, we might think there's another area that we may want to invest some dollars in.
Gotcha.
Right, Tom, how would, like, I'm sure at this point, if people have ideas, you'd love to hear them as you're
Sure.
working on the initial.
Yeah, to the best of my abilities, I'll try to include them in my original proposed budget. Typically, the finance committee, the first amendment the full council considers is kind of an omnibus set of adjustments that the finance committee identifies through its review process. And then beyond that, any councilor has the ability to offer further amendments if it wishes. But very often it really works through this committee first, because you have the time to really devote to thorough review and understanding. And more often than not, they're well received by the full council. They have faith in your process.
Mhm.
Thanks. And I'll try to strike a balance between being naive and maybe taking a fresh set of eyes.
I did want to say one other thing, John, about the board's process or the leadership team's processes. That we found it very valuable to have the whole team there, the whole school board attends the 2 workshop sessions. And I know your structure is quite different in terms of how you are ultimately going to recommend to the full council. But I do think there's value in hearing from the horse's mouth. And I know I do see a lot of counselors sitting in on those sessions
Mhm.
when the finance committee is reviewing. And I'm sure they're taking away those little nuggets that, or watching them online, that you just can't get any other way.
Mhm.
So I've also had folks from your team come and sit in our budget presentations, and I think also have taken away a lot of useful information. So I think either recording those sessions or, scheduling them so that as many people as possible can be there to ask their questions right up front. I think you'll get the most bang for your buck with this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to inviting the entire council to participate if they can.
That's
during-
just my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I noticed that about the board. It's not the finance committee that
It's
gets
the
it.
full, it's the full board that attends those.
Yeah, so we can always ask and see. I mean, again, I hope at a minimum, to your point, they watch. I know last year I wasn't on the committee, but I did watch each one
Right.
when I could.
Mhm.
Not always live, but because they're online, like, people always have that opportunity to watch. But to your point, if they get a question while they're watching, it's better to be there so that you can ask that question live, or sometimes the question Karen might ask, I might have a follow-up, and so you just miss that opportunity. So we can definitely invite the full council whenever we schedule and encourage participation. I also think it would be good, and I would encourage us too as a body. I know last year, I think it was Counselor Hamel who went to the school meeting. Like, again, if we could schedule them in a way, I feel like it would be important for our committee to maybe come to that forum as well, because same thing, like, we're gonna get a lot more information hearing from the departments like you guys do, and at least the committee, maybe, the finance committee could commit to try and physically be there if we can, or at least have representation.
Well, that's always a nice option
Mhm.
if folks can be there from both sides on. So we're all one team in the end,
Mhm.
but we will have ours recorded as well, and that's a great benefit.
One thing I would add, for me being a processor, if we have those 2 days, and then usually it takes me a minute to digest it all. And then it's like afterwards, I'm like, oh, I wish I had asked A, B, or C question. And if maybe, just a thought that popped in my head is if maybe we had a workshop after that for any additional questions that may have popped up, post our big meeting.
Yeah, we've
Uh,
done that in a few different
have we?
ways, right? We've
Okay.
come back like through finance committee, then after you've had the big day,
Yeah.
then you come back and process through some things.
Mhm.
Also, I love the FAQ piece or whatever we call that,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know, that sort of massive
Mhm.
running, here are our questions, Q&A. We did a little bit with that last year and
Mhm.
put some information into the town side, but you're right. I mean, it's a lot to process and the more you're squishing it together into 1 or 2 meetings,
Mhm.
the more time it might take you to get to those
Yeah.
questions. that you have.
I really like that concept of, at least from a planning process, that maybe we say, again, if we can work the schedule to have these, staff reviews early, allow for conversation by finance committee to say, okay, we want to invite other people back to answer some outstanding questions, even doing that jointly with the school board, so that we're saying, okay, let's look at everything if we need school questions too, and have that opportunity for one last joint Q&A for things that are still outstanding or questioning, like that we have questions on, just to at least pencil it in so that we
Yeah.
have it. And if we don't need it, then we don't need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that almost takes the place of, because we always try and do a joint school and town workshop. And I'm not sure if any of the 3 years I've been here, if we've ever really did anything of significance in those. Like sometimes it was the audit that took over and it would be an audit review and it wasn't really a budget workshop. So I just don't know if we need to plan for that or what the objective of that would be at that stage, because it's pretty late in the game.
Yeah, I think that's later that we've typically done it or not done it. So
Mhm.
I think what I'm hearing you say is move that a little further earlier in the process to get more questions answered.
Yeah, the schedule that we've been working on has Jeff and I presenting on March 27th. And so effectively, this committee, the council has about 6 weeks between, that point to adopt it by mid-May, second meeting in May, whatever date that is. How you choose to use those 5 or 6 weeks is entirely up to you. We have floated this concept of kind of 2 longer sessions with senior staff, and they seem receptive. If you're going to kind of front load that, have it early in April, I understand why you do that. I would simply ask that your subsequent meetings, just to make sure that my full staff doesn't feel compelled to be at all your subsequent meetings, that to the extent you can organize your additional work, that you have, questions of this department or that, I can make certain to have the right folks in the room. But those are details we can
Yeah.
go through.
And if we do that FAQ thing again too, with those,
Yeah.
the questions might be answered. So it's really, I would think it's more, there are big questions that probably would be more for you to answer on their behalf,
Sure.
Tom. And I
Sure.
don't know if we would need the department heads per se, but I would think leaving that to your discretion of who you would want there to.
Yeah, just if we can have some understanding and organization of your work, just to make
Mhm.
sure that I have the right people in the room.
Yeah.
We expect to have that FAQ. That's something that Liam and I start, really at the time department heads submit budgets to us, because we have questions and we presume that others will have similar questions. So we'll start it there. There'll be a working document certainly on the day that we present the budget, and then we'll build it out as we go.
Mhm.
Just to plant a seed, with town hall being closed on Fridays, I think would work for staff. If that's something, I don't need a commitment, but that's, a Friday afternoon or morning, whatever works for you, we could do. I don't know if we want to be as aggressive as to do a Friday and a Saturday morning, kind of back to back.
I wouldn't mind that. if that works for everyone.
We could even
can-
separate by a week, but we could do a Friday and a Saturday morning or something like that.
Right. I mean, you know, my schedule
Yeah.
every other week.
Yeah.
Only Wednesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
but- So it's like I could fill it up, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would work for me. I mean, I think hearing this conversation, I think looking to staff to maybe go back and see if we wanted to kind of front load something early, what works best.
Mhm.
I think, you know, we can be flexible, or at least I'll try and be flexible. I don't know if you have a issue or preference.
No, you folks are working every day. I'm a man of leisure. So, so I will, be happy.
Saturday, 7 a.m.
Is that-
I presume a Friday afternoon would be better.
I said a man of
Morning.
leisure.
Yeah, Friday, anytime Friday, for me, like I can make Fridays. Yeah, Friday afternoon is like, what, yeah, yeah.
There we go.
Again, and I can make myself open. afternoon or-
Can you do mornings Friday with enough notice?
Choose the morning or afternoon.
Okay,
I guess I
yeah,
could
okay.
wait.
John, if you don't mind, we can perhaps collaborate and
Yep.
come up with a schedule. I think the sooner we all get this on our calendar, the better.
Yep, I agree.
So good, we'll work with that.
Okay. Any other thoughts on improvements or other things we may want to try differently this year?
Can I jump in
Yeah.
with one thing?
Mhm.
One thing that I employ when I'm putting together budgets and doing projections is, and we can think about this for the school, but I know we have some rules with the school that I don't know if they apply with the town or not. There are some initiatives when I'm putting together a budget that I can't fund based on my revenue, where revenue's at or where I expect revenue to fall at. But often when you get a little further into the year, you know, I keep a running tally of what those initiatives of investments that we want to make. And then as we get into the year, okay, revenue's doing better, expenses are coming in under, and I can kind of slide some of those initiatives in.
Mhm.
So like, they don't have to like fall off and disappear until next year, but I can slide them in. And you guys may already do that, but I just wanted to float that
Yeah,
out
I would
there.
need to come back for subsequent budget authority to do
Oh,
so.
All right,
Um,
your rules are different
Yeah.
than mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
probably some flexibility built in, but any major initiative, I would feel like I need additional authorization.
Mhm.
And there's a budget amendment process that can be followed.
Yeah.
if
Okay.
Needed.
Norm, any thoughts from you? I know last year was your first budget, or any spoilers you want to share in terms of things you're going to do differently that we can get excited about?
No spoilers at this moment,
Okay,
but I can guarantee you the audit will not take over the conversation.
there we go. That's good.
So Norm, I have a question for you. Is what I'm saying about sort of translating some of this into, you know, sort of normal, quote, business accounting, income, expense categories, last year, this year, that sort of thing. I know that's not full municipal accounting, but am I asking for something that's stupid here or?
No, that's a valid ask and it can be done and, you know, we just, you know, instead of presenting things departmentally for you all to digest, we can aggregate and look at the whole picture of the town and, you know, look at what the total
Yeah.
things like, you know, personnel and
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the standard big categories
Right.
that you would see. And I'll give you a silly example. It probably took me 15 to 20 minutes to figure out what the difference between gross and net revenues are. Now, I know now, okay, but I was just looking for, you know, normally what you see is total revenues and then you might see, you know, various categories of the money coming in, and then you see a couple lines and that's how much money you have. And then you see expenses and, you know, operating expenses by category, blah, 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 debt, et cetera. You know the drill.
Mhm.
So that's really more of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And that is not to replace anything. It's just to kind of give a, you know, easy look overview that says, where are we going here?
Yeah, and what I'm saying, and I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're saying, Counselor Cushing, is like, for me, it's like, I guess I like the detail, I like the really high level, but I feel like there's something in between by department that brings them a little bit more together, where it is kind of like, I live in the world of budgets where we talk more about the GL level code, where if it's comp and ben, outside services, you know, training and development, like certain classifications of expenses that help you just kind of see at a glance where's the money going, and then how is that money changing year over year, so that you can see, okay, we're really investing in training and development this year. Let's talk about that. Like, let's understand why that's so important. And
Exactly. It helps you understand what the priorities are, where the changes are,
Mhm,
where you may have fallen short in another period. And then all the rest of that stuff you can kind of dig into. And then,
mhm,
of course, when you have that, and then people are coming in presenting their case for their thing,
mhm.
then everybody is sort of, I think, on the same page with respect to the big picture.
Mhm.
And to me, that would just be a good starting place. So I agree with you completely.
Anybody in the public? I saw Counselor Hamel, you had your hand up. So any comments from the public on process improvements?
You want the public to go first, or I'm happy to be?
Anyone else from the public want to comment on budget process?
This is a regular public comment.
No. Mm-mm.
I had a couple of comments. One is on the schedule itself. You asked for feedback on that, and I'm kind of looking at the schedule here. And were you able to do kind of like a side-by-side comparison? Because this version actually looks condensed to me compared to what we followed last year. I don't see, other than 3 yellow bars, I don't really see any opportunity for the public, in a workshop format. And I think we had something like that we added last year prior to first reading and vote, which is pretty important, because and I've mentioned this before, if that budget doesn't, if the second budget doesn't get passed, then we're stuck with the first budget. So we want to make sure that we have extensive public feedback and extensive opportunity for the full council to review those things. I don't see that in this schedule. And I'm not looking for an answer now. I'm just this is feedback that I had looking at it and being a veteran of 5 budget cycles.
Mhm.
So that, the other thing is that normally we have department level reviews, and I appreciate the comment that Councilor Cushing made about trying to simplify it. But there's an expression: there's nothing new under the sun. Last year, the approved budget was 82 pages or 232 pages long, Tom. It was well over 200 pages. So that detail needs to be there, whether everyone needs to look at it or wants to look at it. It needs to be there, and it will be there. So how much of that makes it into a meeting and a review and a discussion, I think, is optional. But there needs to be an opportunity for folks who follow this closely to be able to track that and to see key issues.
Mhm.
One final comment I had is that there's an assumption that that headcount, that salaries and benefits are a quote unquote fixed expense, and that is not true. That is a semi-fixed expense. We have contractual obligations, which again, Councilor Cushing referenced. I expect that we'd have a fair amount of discussion about that. With this is a contract renegotiation year, so I would expect that we would spend a lot of time on that. But those things, and headcount levels as well, or the decisions you're going to make about expanding headcounts in areas and where they need to be, that needs to see the light of day. So those are things that I just would suggest that we take a hard look at in terms of the budget schedule. And that the idea of afternoon sessions for the public, I think, is a non-starter. I don't think people are going to take time off from work to come to those sessions. But otherwise, I mean, I think we have a good track record. We have, good discipline around reviewing appropriations. I know we spent a lot of energy last year taking stuff off the never-ending CIP list. So I think that I would expect that we would try to do those things again this year. So, great, thanks.
The one thing we've done the past 2 years, and again, it goes back to Councilor Hamel's comment about giving public opportunity, is we've been holding joint tables. And well, that's not on the schedule. I'm just curious about, does this group feel like those are worth trying to do again and continue? Again, the intent there was members from the board and the council sit and are available. And if anybody comes and has questions or comments, that we could hear them in a more informal manner. I would say we got really good feedback by a couple folks. They weren't widely attended, but those are always things we can make available throughout the process in case people really want to dig in and come and offer comments.
Doing like a council corner or just like a budget? Because
Oh.
I wanted to attend them last year, but you scheduled them on days that I could not attend.
These ones,
So I think they're valuable. I think it's important to put ourselves out there and say we want to talk about it because then,
Mhm.
again, it's just being out there.
yeah, and maybe if we get them penciled in early enough and get them out there, it'll give people an opportunity to, one, attend or watch the workshop stuff, then come prepared, maybe review the FAQ, because the FAQ is a good document. There were a lot of things when I got questions or when people came, I referred to the FAQ because it was in there like 9 times out of 10. So that is a really good document. So we can kind of help people know like, hey, come watch these, look at the FAQ. We're going to have these roundtable options that maybe one of us can always be there with a board member, really just to collect additional comments, questions.
I think the roundtables are important because I mean, I went back and I watched videos after things happen. So maybe
Mhm.
they're not, very much attended, but I do think there is
Yeah.
people watching them after. And I think it's important for us to be out there.
John, I want to come back to what Councilor Hamel pointed out is that, yeah, if we're having these things on work days at 7 o'clock in the morning, then if nothing else, it sort of sends the wrong message to the community in terms of, giving convenient access. So I think that's a very good point. And I still like the idea of 2 half-day sessions,
Mhm.
but maybe they need to be half-evening sessions or weekends or whatever. I'll leave that to you less leisurely people to figure out.
Mhm.
But I think that we certainly need to make this entire process open to the public. And I want to respond to just one other point about the 250 pages. I want to make sure that people understand that I get that we need all of that budget detail. But I also want to point out with a little story from going way back that when they introduced the F-4 Phantom jet aircraft, they put lots of electronics and buzzers and beepers in it. And the pilots had tons of information and they got shot down until they figured out how to turn them off. Now, that's not to say that they could not turn them back on when they wanted more information, but sometimes too much information is a distraction from the purpose. And so what I'm advocating for is tiers of information so that we can weed ourselves down into the detail when we need to. So last point, I'm guessing that we will have many more budget processes and there'll be many more people like me and there'll be many eyeballs rolling going, oh my God, we've done this before and now we have newbie. Suck it up.
To speak, I mean, Don does have a good point, but I'm curious how other towns do their budget, because we're also then, I don't remember what we did last year. Was all of our sessions in the evening?
Yeah, I
Is
believe
that
so.
Typical because,
It was earlier, I think it was a 4 o'clock start.
and so I guess I'd like a comparison because if we are the only town who is, suddenly doing them during the day, then maybe you have a good point. But if all the other towns are doing it during normal business hours, because this is their job and I do want staff to also be able to go home at night. And if we're willing to come during the day, I'm more
Mhm.
willing to do that. But if I'm seeing a trend, then I would
Yeah.
like to make it more accessible.
I think the thing that's amazing about technology today is like everything will be recorded and available and everybody can participate when it
I
works
couldn't
for
log into the
them.
ordinance last night, but that's
Yeah.
just me.
But again, I know like the school does it. My experience has been some of it starts early in the workday and some is,
One is the morning, one's the afternoon.
Yeah, most
If I remember
recently,
right.
we've done one in the evening and then one the following morning. We've actually done them back to back intentionally to try to keep that flow and
mhm.
make sure that all the information is produced within a short period of time, so then we can really dig in.
Yeah.
Following that, but yeah, we have one, for this year, we've scheduled one, from 4:30 to 7. On a Monday night and then the following Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
Next day, which is it's convenient for us because it's our regular leadership team time.
Yeah.
It's already set aside.
So our objective is convenience for all, and so that might mean not convenient for some people, but ultimately the good news is that all of this is out there, will be public, and there'll be many opportunities for people to offer input. It's not just that one meeting that is the only time people can offer input. So I feel like that's why I was thinking of those roundtables, because those are really the opportunity to really just sit with counselors or in school board. So I would, Carolyn, ask you to just, if you were to go back to the finance committee and see if they're willing to kind of partner with us to find 3 or 4 times throughout the cycle where we can have one board, one counselor from the committees together, maybe with some staff support in case we need it, to just be there to answer questions and follow up with people who've really dug in and want to ask some questions that we can try and answer, or at least gather and bring back and figure out how to respond. All right, with that, I'm going to close that discussion. The next one I want to focus on is, because we have our land trust partners here, is discussing Alger Hall and the potential lease with the Scarborough Land Trust. I thank you guys for coming.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. So that was, in my view, a budget review process discussion. Do you intend also to talk about financial goals? Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure staff stays.
Yes. And then this one, I want to do this one because we have
Yep.
the SLT here and want to make sure they have the opportunity to participate. So just to set this one up. Yep.
As a land trust people, you've got employees here, and it's better. We're okay.
Yeah.
So, the attorney-
Well, I'm fine going with this one first, if that works for you guys and for staff. Like, it's just, I'm just trying to be cognizant of special guests that we have here because we have other stuff to talk about. You guys are also welcome to come and sit at the table as well. So again, what we talked about at our last council meeting was, as part of the decision process around what was discussed around leasing, we felt like it was important that the finance committee take an opportunity to just do financial due diligence and make sure we dig in and understand the financial impact. And I don't think staff is prepared today to share anything. It's really our opportunity to give guidance in terms of information we would want to see so that they can partner with the land trust as appropriate to kind of give us that financial information to make a more informed decision as we move this opportunity forward. So with that, anything, counselors, that you guys want to kick off with in terms of what you would be looking for in terms of financial information to help support decision-making around this opportunity?
Sure. So I mean, I spoke, remind me your name again.
Dawn.
Dawn. I spoke to Dawn right before and I asked her an impossible question. And I said, is there a way for you to tell me how much it costs the land trust per acre to manage? So like, oh, for every acre the Scarborough Land Trust has, this is how much it costs us to maintain it. I realize that's sort of a loaded question, but I think if there's some way for us, for you to show us and to show the residents really how much it cost you guys to maintain all of your land, never mind. I mean, I know in this last year, we gifted you 3 properties to just take over. Thank you. And I think there is a lot of disconnect between maybe what you guys take on for us, and so I think there's a lot of value that I would like to see that you bring to the table there. Just to shoot off my list, I guess, I worry that the quote that you gave for the work I wonder if that's really what needs to be done to the building. I wonder if that's really all of the work. I didn't know if that included the bathroom. I know that you had asked for the ADA. My personal opinion is I think if we're going to be leasing this, the town has some sort of obligation to bring it up to code to an extent. And because we're working with a nonprofit, I personally, again, think it's not unreasonable for them to be looking to us to make it ADA accessible, because ultimately we're the ones owning the building, maintaining it. I mean, I guess I was a landlord, so I'm like, if you want to rent this, right now it's not rentable, it's not legal. So we can't, even for $1, we can't legally be like, oh, rent this. And then I do wonder if, I get the sense that the Scarborough Land Trust does not want to own it, which, and I don't know, but I heard, I think there was conversations around, oh, well, you know, there's gonna be space to use. Could we have other people rent out the space? And Jean Marie's like, well, maybe we can make a kitchen. I don't know if we want to have a discussion about the building as a whole and what the town wants to see with the building, and then what we can let the land trust do with it. Or if we're just gonna say, land trust, go with it, because I wonder if there is value in exploring if we did, the town put a little bit of money into it and made it a little bit nicer, if it would be a better building for everybody, not just the land trust. You know, I personally think it would be great to hold on to that building. We're creating our own little municipal campus down in that area. So again, I think it's worth taxpayers' money to put a little bit into it.
Jing?
Well, Karen, you have persuaded me on the handicapped accessibility. It was originally sort of like, we're giving you the building, can't we just kind of give you free rent and let it go? But I think you make a good point about the town taking care of those external things that would at least bring that up. I'm not interested much in going more than that, and I listened to all of the exciting possibilities around kitchen and extra meeting space and those kinds of things. And they may or may not all be good ideas. I think for the purposes of simplicity, what we ought to do is create a lease with a term and an option that justifies the capital investment that you guys are making in it. So I don't know if that's a 10-year, you know, if that's 3 10-year terms, if that's 2 15-year terms, whatever it is. But I think that the other things that you're talking about is once you folks get in there, start working on the building, doing that stuff, then it seems to me that it would be reasonable to come back and say, look, there are some other opportunities here, and we'd like to partner with the town on them in this way or that way. So I'm not saying don't do any of that stuff. I'm saying let's get started. Let's get a lease, put, you know, reasonable terms, option to renew, etc. I'd have to rely on Tom's expertise and Norm's expertise on our side of that transaction, just to make sure that we are protected on all those things like liability, insurance, and all of those specific details. But my inclination is to get her done and break it up into smaller bites with options to renew, and sort of express a willingness and an openness to support the partnership that we have with the land trust. And that would get you an opportunity to perhaps get more data from them on what does it cost to maintain all that space. And in my view, the land trust is a really, really vital part of keeping open space in our community consistent with our goals. And so let's do it.
Yes. So the way I look at this is like I'm putting on my CFO hat, is the way I'm looking at it. So when I think of it, I think of the revenues that could be coming in were from Karen Martin, $42,000 a year. So that's $840,000 over that 20-year period. When I look at the expenses that were shared, there's $80,000 of SLT donations that we would be deferring that we do typically. It sounds like we do $4,000 a year. It would avoid $6,000 in some operational costs annually for the town. And then you guys are making an investment of $250,000. So to me, the expenses are $450,000. So the differential between those two is $390,000 over a 10-year period or 20-year period, which is about $20,000 a year. So the question is, I think the question is for you guys to help justify what that $20,000 a year means for you guys from an operating budget to support your mission, and why that is important for us to consider. And I think it goes back to what Councilor Shoup you were kind of saying, like what, if you had $20,000 a year that you could support your main mission on, what does that mean in terms of things you can serve, new acquisitions? Like, there's value there that I think we just need your guys' help understanding, but also being able to articulate that to the community when we go forward. And I think $20,000 a year for a nonprofit, I'm sure there's so much you guys can do with that, especially if you look at it over that 20-year period. So for me, the question is if we're giving it to you for $1 lease over a 20-year period, this $400,000 investment that we're giving back to you, what are you going to do with it for our community? And help us understand that and justify it.
I think that's a fair question. I don't doubt that you'll have any trouble doing it, but I think, right, so it's gonna save you the expense of owning, maintaining, renting a building someplace else, so that means you're gonna have some extra money. And personally, I would imagine you'd have no trouble finding good uses for it, but I don't think it's unreasonable to ask what those are.
Yeah.
So,
And even putting it in context, $400,000 over 20 years, can you even buy an acre of land in Scarborough for $400,000 now? So that's like, as we partner with you guys with the land fund, again, what I'm looking for is a story we can tell taxpayers and people that this is what the deal is, this is what they're committing, this is really the differential, and I think we can easily describe $400,000 and value and conservation and other things that this would allow for you guys to do. So help us help you by giving us that story.
Well, if you saw the current issue of the leader, we just got 8 more acres under conservation at 0 cost to the town,
Oh, that's good.
right on the marsh.
Good. Any thoughts from the land trust or the town, or questions you guys have from us to help kind of move this along?
I guess I would just say, I appreciate kind of the financial approach that you just laid out, and I understand, and I think it's a worthwhile exercise, but I also want to appreciate that I would never recommend that we put this out on the open market and fetch the highest price. And so there's a bit of a false narrative there that if you go down that road, I don't know that there's not an equivalency that's comparable entirely anyway. I mean, it's vitally important that we protect our primary interest, which is the Dunstan Fire Station, first and foremost, and really a historic building. And the best way to do that is to do it with a good tenant, one that we have a good track record with. And so I think that needs to be factored into the equation, the relationship matters.
And I think that's the justification. Like it's both and, right? It's not one or the other. I think we need that full story, and then this becomes like, what value do you put on that we have a good partner who's willing to work with us to keep the fire department operating fully functionally to serve our residents? Like, that's hard to put a dollar value on, but that's an important piece of information the council needs as we're evaluating not only the financial, but the broader, benefit to the community.
So, Tom, you're saying that the meat in this meal is an economical way to preserve that space for the town.
Yeah, the reason I brought the property before the council in the first place was really to protect our existing interest next door.
So I'm saying that's the meat on the plate. The salad is, how does this help us tangentially? And I think both parts of the story are important, but I wanted to underscore what you're saying is that what we're asking here is, or what we're doing here is, we have this building next to the fire station. We don't want to have to maintain it or rent it commercially. And so we found really good middle ground here. That makes complete sense to me. And that's going to help these people out, and it's not unreasonable for us to ask how. And I think,
and the real trifecta here is that the sole work that they do is work that we've identified and highly valued, and we don't do it and we shouldn't do it. And whatever we can do to help support that effort, I think we are the beneficiaries of.
Is that the potato on the plate?
That's the dessert.
Yeah.
How about a Brussels sprout?
Yeah. We had meat, salad, potato. We need a carb. All right. Any other thoughts on this one, on this item? No?
Potatoes are carbs.
Yeah, that's why I wanted the
And
potato.
and
I
I
needed a
don't
carb.
want to be a potato.
Yeah.
So we've not actually talked about this since the council met at your workshop. So I think the next step for us, logical step would be to actually draft out the terms of the lease.
Mhm.
Get the framework in place. Would you like that to come back to this group for one
don't-
last test?
I don't know if we need the terms of the lease. I think the council can handle that. I think what would be helpful for us is to see maybe the memo
Okay.
that is the meat, potatoes and salad that justify what we're doing, and then be able to kind of make sure that we feel like we're doing a good job. That, you know, the committee feels like is doing a good job at kind of.
I think
giving
we'll
the-
run those on kind of parallel tracks, and I think be in a position to bring that to you at your next meeting.
Unless the committee wants to see the
Well-
lease in advance, I mean.
God, no, I don't want to see the
Yeah,
lease,
yeah.
but what I would like to see is just the term sheet, just the outline of how long, what's the option, you know, any major important things, liability protections, those kinds of things that are.
I guess the one piece I do want to just circle back to is I heard at least two of you, if not three, suggest that the town should undertake at least the handicap ramp.
Yes,
I'm leaning that way as well.
I will need to identify financial resources to do so. I suspect we can. What I'm certain we can't do is to accomplish all the ADA improvements, including bathroom renovations. But if we're talking about the ramp itself to gain access to that first floor, the upper floor. I see heads nodding. Okay, I'll work on that.
All right. Next item is financial goals. Again, for this one, we have our goal setting meeting as a council on the 27th of January. And last time, I believe the finance committee kind of worked a little bit on what they wanted to propose for financial goals. And so again, just wanted to have a discussion. Are there any specific goals we would like to propose that again, we would bring to the council workshop on the 27th? So what I can do is get some ideas and feedback today and craft a statement that we could potentially have for discussion at the goals meeting. One thing about this year that's unique is that it's a reval year. So we've always historically said a goal to keep the mill rate as close to 3%. But because it's a reval year, we may need to rethink how we write that goal or what we say about that, because it's likely that our mill rate's going to go down, I think, after all the reval work happens. So it's not going to be a 3% increase. It could be like a 5% decrease given what it is year over year. So again, I think we just want to figure out what are the goals we would want to set as guidance for us for more the budget and financial decision making. So I did have some initial back and forth with Nick on this a while ago, so I don't know.
Yeah, we've got a couple of
Yeah.
thoughts there. We've
Yeah.
got 2 or 3 slides.
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
frame that issue
Yeah.
quite well.
Mhm.
And I'll ask Nick to kind of
Yeah,
walk
I'm
us through
happy
that.
to jump in. And per our conversation, I was going to originally include this in a revaluation workshop, but I was astutely told that it might be better served here, not only because it's sooner, but because this is the body that will be setting or at least recommending the goal to the council. So this first slide that is just pointing out some of the obvious things that you just mentioned about the budget process, at least obvious for council members, that there's a component of the budget process that takes into account the townwide valuation. And we don't know what it's going to be several months in advance until the tax amendment. But based on my discussions with Tom every year, I'm able to give an estimate of certain numbers that needs to be known to at least get in the ballpark. But furthermore, the council has their own policy that they've utilized in previous years. So as Councilor Anderson pointed out, we don't have the luxury of the normal year of, oh, we'll have 150 million new growth or 100 million new growth. Just tag that on to last year's total and we'll be in the range, because there's also the appreciation of the market value in a reval year. There's also other estimates I provide that are reimbursements from the state and the overlay, and those change, but are generally in the ballpark between when I first tell Tom and, March, and then when you decide later to pass the budget, they're generally pretty close. So if you go to the next slide, this is, it's a little small, but it's just to point out an excerpt of what the adopted budget tax rate comp sheet looks like at the very bottom. And I pointed out, the box A there, it just says that everything labeled in yellow is estimates that I helped provide early on, and they do change later. So like when Tom presents the initial budget in March, it will have estimates that I helped to weigh in on those areas. And like I underlined at the top there, even when you passed the budget in June last year, it was still an estimate, but it's very close because the actuals change based on the valuation, which isn't known until August. So the overlay, that's an example of that will go up in a revaluation year because you expect to have to deal with more abatements perhaps. TIFs and credit enhancement agreements may or may not be in the same ballpark, but I'll help weigh in on that. And the exemptions, both Homestead and Betty, I will help weigh in on those as well. They will be fairly similar, but the one that won't be similar will be the townwide valuation.
Mhm.
It will be markedly higher, 2 billion higher. It's a lot higher because of the market appreciation since the last revaluation. As a result, the tax rate will go down. But so the difference between a normal year, you see the box B and C, the council policy is that to set that estimate, you utilize what was the last year's growth. So say it was 100 million. Well, you multiply that by 0.9. So you say, we're going to take the total town valuation plus 90 million, and that's going to be our starting estimate.
Mhm.
And then I generally, tell Tom, I think we're actually going to have the same as last year. So in this instance of last year's budget, your estimate followed the policy of 90% of the prior year's growth tagged on, but Tom did 100% of the prior year's growth tagged on for the estimate.
Mhm.
So what I'm proposing as one option here could be, if you'd like, and Tom agrees that it's a good approach, I'm certainly happy to give a ballpark revaluation estimate in March, but it will certainly be a ballpark because the work won't be done yet. There's some value in that, but it's up to your discretion if that's useful or not. But if you were to choose to go that route, you'd probably want a second update on that as you get closer to the budget process. And it still won't be foolproof because the commitment doesn't happen until August. And there's a lot of fluctuation because I meet with people in June and July, and that number likely will go down if they prove some differences.
Mhm.
So that's one approach to consider. On the next slide, the approach that's even more important for your consideration, whether or not you want certain types of estimates from me or not, is what your goal is going to be. So in a normal year, you might say that we would like a tax rate increase of less than 3%, let's say, or a tax rate as close to, I think last year, 1585 as possible. So you're not going to have that luxury this year in the normative sense because the tax rate will certainly go way down. We don't know how much. So to say a 3% increase wouldn't mean anything because it's going to be a decrease most certainly because the town valuation will go up so much.
Mhm.
And do so, the actual effect of decisions you make for the FY25 budget will get lost in that.
Yeah.
Reval process. It will just be a rounding error, basically in the overall change.
So there's ways you can still consider that. If you use your council policy to have the normative year estimate. So instead of 5.1 billion, we're going to say 5.2. That'll get you your 3% budget. But I'm suggesting that maybe a different option if you go to the next slide. This is just one type of example. These are several years of top-down financial data from each budget. And one other consideration instead of the tax rate increase could be something like the change in the annual budget, which is to the furthest right. And I just averaged out that many years that I had easily accessible. And it happened to be 4.77% on average over those very many years. But I also pointed out the last 2 years, because of the financial situation in our world today, different constraints or opportunities, it's been a slightly higher. You could take such things as that into consideration and maybe take, what's the change in the budget? Formerly, you've done gross budget, net budget. Those are opportunities for things to consider this year, since you won't have the percent increase in tax rate as the same kind of, benchmark as you normally would in a non-reval year.
What's being presented here I'd characterize it as the net budget. It's the amount that you need to raise through property taxes.
I like that. That's what I was thinking, maybe is a simpler way, and because of all the changes that are gonna happen with the reval, I feel like it's gonna be tough to communicate. But I think what we can say is, in the past, historically, over the past 5 years, our average net budget increase was X percent. And so, at least from a planning perspective for the budget year, we're gonna use that average as our target. And then the conversations we have will kind of help us figure out how high above or below we want to go based on that number. So that could be a way we set the goal, is say, where we, it doesn't have to be the 2-year average, the 6.23. We could say, we can look at the 5 years. The thing with the 5 years, though, a lot of there's COVID stuff, so that kind of throws it off where we deliberately made decisions to keep things low. But, I think that's a way we could say, give us a gross budget or target a gross budget that's 5% increase. And then again, through the budget process, it could be 5.1, it could be 5.2, it could be 4.8, but at least it gives us kind of a target to work through. So
Alrighty then.
any,
If I am lost, I feel like other people might be
Okay.
lost at this point. So as a resident, we are expected to see, we say our goal is 3%. So what you're saying is we are going to our goal session and we cannot set that for the residents because it's a reevaluation.
yeah,
So you're saying there's no way for us to walk in there and say it's gonna be 3%, even though our value is gonna go up through the roof.
well, if it was a 3% increase compared to this year, then that means the mill rate would actually be going
It's gonna
up
be a
3%.
15% decrease or
Yes.
whatever. It's gonna be
It's gonna
significant
be a
decrease.
decrease.
Because your tax rate will plummet because of the extra value through the reval. So quite simply,
Okay.
the metrics that you could look at, that we can isolate, we could do some historical analysis, is to look at gross spending, basically year over year. That's a real kind of direct and simple measurement, right? How much more are we spending this year than last? Or the net budget, which is how much more do we need to raise through property taxes this year than last? I think either of those metrics could be used and used successfully here.
Well, Karen, I'm with you. I'm just a little confused, so I want to try to come back with maybe some English. So my understanding, and I think what we're going to tell the taxpayers, is that the reevaluation is neutral. Is neutral with respect to your taxes. So that means that if your house is valued more, then the mill rate collectively goes down. Is that correct? If we didn't do anything else, that's what would happen, and your tax bill would be the same.
If everybody's value went up the same exact amount, which.
Well,
doesn't happen, but yeah.
but in general, what the overall approach here is to adjust the valuations upward to reflect the market and to bring the mill rate back down
That's correct, yeah.
to reflect, so that the revaluation isn't a backdoor tax increase.
Yeah.
That's point one. Okay.
Mhm.
But now what I understand is because of the timing of all of this and the budget, then we may be contemplating a tax increase because of increases in spending. Okay, so if we weren't doing this, our discussion would be, well, we've added this many things to the budget, and we're going to increase, and in order to pay for that delta, we're going to need to change the mill rate, right? To cover the difference, right? Taxes have to go up. So
Certainly.
independent, so right now the mill rate's what, 1596 or something like that?
1597, yeah.
Right. And so if we, independent of the reval, we go out and we say, okay, we're going to increase our spending by $5 million or some number, then the only place that money's coming from is by increasing that 1597 to some other number. Right? And that's kind of simple math. Okay. Now, because of the timing of all of this, we do have a little bit of a perception problem in the community, because what is likely to happen is that people are going to hear us say over and over again, the valuation doesn't affect my tax rate. And when they open their tax bill, some of them may find it did. Okay. And so, that's one point. And the second point is that I think I understood that you were saying target, I'm not sure whether we should be targeting a percentage increase in the budget and how that translates into mill rate. So in other words, if we were saying, we don't really want this mill rate to go more than 3% over what it is last year, then you would be able to tell us then what kind of, give us a rough idea of how much spending latitude we had in total. Right, is that a fair
If
statement?
you go back one slide, Liam, to the, one more. So this here, the way you could get to that effect of modeling what would a 3% tax rate increase, what would it be in a normal reval year, would be to follow your policy on the budget, keep that line item as an estimate, and do the 90% of last year's growth, which was approximately 150 million. So let's round and say it was 140 million. You tag that on, and you'll be able to see if you're at the 3% or not.
So one way, and again,
So-
all this is like tough, it's a
Right.
communication.
Well,
challenge.
that makes, so from the standpoint of achieving the result, that makes a great deal of sense to me. From the standpoint of explaining it to people,
Mhm.
that is tougher. And
Yeah.
I know it's not my prerogative, but I noticed that Don had his hand up out there and he's pretty smart on these things. So I wonder if you had anything to add.
I had two questions, actually. I didn't have anything to add because it's just a monkey puzzle.
Yeah, it's a monkey, that's fine.
I can't solve. So I just have a question. What did we do last time? We had a reval. What did we do in terms of managing this last time? How did we handle it?
Did we set a goal?
My recollection is we did what was just spoken about last year, is that we did our best to estimate an increase in total valuation, putting aside the impact of the reval entirely.
So am
Were
I,
there any injuries as a result or did it all?
And I did have a follow-up question. This is going to take time to sink in for me, so I cannot turn on a dime. I'm going to have to think on this, sleep on it. But Don makes a great point. I think a couple of other folks have touched on it, is the timing here. So we're going to be approving a budget and then we get the real number. And so.
But there's no way around
That
it.
expectation.
Yeah, there's no way around the timing. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And so this is about making sure that we provide as much clarity and line of sight into the budget process, knowing that this other thing is going around
yeah,
at the same time that has nothing to do with it, other than
when it,
setting the final result.
I think ultimately too, we're trying to, at least I would like to make sure that the community knows, because this is a reval year, we're not trying to take advantage of that so that the mill rate can be significantly higher with a lot more spending. We're still trying to show some prudence and say, we are going to be prudent like we always have been when it comes to tax increase. And we need a goal to work through budget that we can all say, that's a good barometer for us to hold ourselves to from a budget perspective. And the way we could set this, to your point, is maybe we take the policy of what we anticipate the reval to be at 90%, understand what that would mean from a net budget increase, so that we can say, following policy, the net budget increase that would try and keep us in that 3% range would be a net budget increase of X. And that's what we're doing. And it's taking our policy, but really the number to me is what's important. It's like, what is that X? Is it 5 million, 3 million? Like, what does that look like in terms of what we can see in terms of net budget increase if all things were kind of frozen and we just kept things the same? Does that make sense? Tom, you're.
Yeah, no, I was originally concerned that we, as part of this, if we do that, we'll be talking about one mill rate that is agnostic, doesn't even consider the impact of reval. And I thought that would be confusing because in the end, the mill rate's gonna be something decidedly different than
Yeah.
that. But that might be the best way to really distinguish between the two and draw attention to the simple point that yes, all values went up, but mill rate went down considerably.
Mhm.
So I think as a taxpayer, I would understand it is to say, here was your valuation. Here is your new valuation. Here is the mill rate adjusted to that new valuation, giving you the same tax bill. Here's the increase in the town budget added to the mill rate.
Mhm.
Here's your tax. So in other words, as we actually send it out to people, we are showing them that we did what we said we were going to do,
Yeah.
which is to give a neutral, a neutral increase in taxes. It's not here. And to show people that the increase is purely related to all of the wonderful work that this finance committee and
Yeah.
budget has done to you.
Well, it's almost, for each individual, it's gonna be a slightly different picture, right? Because I anticipate the value of my neighborhood to be higher than the rest of Scarborough, so I anticipate
Good for
I'm
you.
gonna pay more taxes because of the reval. But then I'm also gonna have a little bit more added because of the investment choices we make
But
this year.
what's
in the
not going
budget.
to, what's not going to change is your tax rate. And that is the most, that's.
No, it will certainly, tax rate will change.
Well,
What
his
doesn't
mill rate
change
will
is the
change?
Levy.
Mill rate
Yeah.
will
So
change.
the
Yes.
budget doesn't change as a result of the revaluation. So the budget only changes through appropriation
I
changes.
get that, but what I'm saying is that if it's going to, if your tax bill after valuation is going to be neutral, right? And your value goes up, then your mill rate has to come down.
Yeah.
In order to come to the same thing. And then the next step is that we pass a budget and then we add to that mill rate and you pay, because of your valuation, a higher portion of, your taxes go up relative to
Yeah,
what your valuation
I
is.
think this is just showing the complexities of the communication that this is gonna be for
Yeah.
people, and I think it's just really
Well,
about, needing to break down, at least from a goal perspective. I think we're all committed to like trying to find a number thing that we
Right.
can show the public that, hey, we're not gonna do a 10% budget increase next year because
and
we know that's not something that the public would generally accept.
so
We're gonna have a target that's, appropriate. And then we're gonna have to figure out how we communicate, well, what does that really mean? And part of that communication, when someone gets their tax bill, there will be people who may pay less even at the end of all of this because of the reval. And there may be people who look at their tax bill and are maybe shocked because they're seeing a significant increase relative to what they had before. Some of that is gonna be where the reval actually makes them land when they look at all the houses in Scarborough. So this is what's really hard about this is like the impact to people's tax bills next year is gonna be partially related to the reval, but also partially related to what we decide as a budget
And
increase.
I guess my request would be that you all take a stab at developing a kitchen table explanation of this thing and some concrete examples before we get out there and test it with the public to see if you get head nods or eye rolls. Because I think that's really where we have to get to here within the current context of not everybody believing that everything that happens here is perfect, if you know what I mean.
We're talking about setting a financial number for budget, but I think what you just said, that to me is a goal that we should have as a council, is that we want to make sure we have really good vetted communications, which I know Nick is committed to doing and trying
Sure.
to work through. But to me, that would be success this year, is if we really have the public feel very well informed on the impact that these choices have made on their tax bill.
Yes.
I think that that's probably more important than the number we're trying to come up
And,
with.
and
right now.
I would go a little, I would go the teachers in the room, I guess we still have one. But, you know, the old teacher in me said, well, what do we want the learner to understand at the end of this class? The learner will be able to describe, state, explain, put together, whatever. So I think my point, so what I would say is that the goal is that we are able to get people in general to understand this stuff
Mhm.
in a way that they can say, okay, they may not like it, we're not, okay, but at least they can say, here was a process that happened with integrity, which it is, and that I understand it. And so right now I feel like I'm informed, but I don't think I could confidently explain it back to someone yet.
Yeah.
And that really is the goal.
Yep.
Yes.
It goes till 7. It was 5 to 7 on the,
Our meetings were an hour and a half. I feel about 6.
oh, you do? It's 6:30.
What is-
So
When-
with this, I think what we can do, just maybe to close this conversation out. Do you guys feel like you've gotten enough information from us? to
Well,
maybe-
are our finance committee meetings 2 hours moving forward?
I
They've
don't know.
always been an
It's-
hour and a half, I thought.
It was 5 to 7 on the calendar.
Whatever you wish. They generally have been 90 minutes, last year anyway.
Then you have 33 minutes.
John, may I make one comment? And I had two questions.
Yeah.
The comment, this is a great discussion, and I like really what people are describing in terms of the process we'll follow, full disclosure, step by step, and we're going to show our work, right? So I think that's great. I do have two questions, though. One is, we've had a little activity with flooding in the past couple of years. Will that have an effect on the valuation of property for this cycle?
If it's reflected in the real estate market.
We do have a workshop on the reval on next Wednesday too, so.
I can try to give that thought and speak to it with some forethought at said meeting.
Terrific.
Mhm.
Okay, it's always 3 steps ahead.
Yep.
Second, and this may be, something that can't be answered tonight, but something to think about. Is this possibly the year where we decide to select another target figure other than mill rate?
Mhm.
Food for thought.
Yeah. I mean, I would be interested for staff to maybe come back with a recommendation for our goal workshop again with the same train of thought. Like I think knowing if we kept to policy, saw a 90% change in the valuation, what would that mean in terms of an estimate for net spending that we could do next year? And that could be the goal. Or it could be, the other option could be look at the past 5 years, what's the average? And I don't view these as we're gonna meet those goals. I view them as a place to have a conversation around so that we can stay close to that, where again, as we were talking about earlier about budget reviews, if the budget that's presented is around that target for conversation, then let's look at some of those other investment choices and say, hey, we want to invest more, which could make it go up, or maybe we want to pull back on things and it could go down. But having that target that the council agrees to is what we want to be focusing on, just gives the committee guidance as we go through the budget. So I think we need that as well. And then I also think there's a second goal that we may want to propose that, Nick, I know you're very much working on, but Don, what you said of, I'm paraphrasing, but residents are informed to understand how both the revow and change in the tax levy impacts their tax bill. And so that's something we would partner with Nick on, I think, as part of the revow process, which I know you have a very big focus on. So great. All right, so closing out goals and now moving on to the last item of the agenda, which is again, at our last meeting, we had a lot of good ideas of different things we wanted to tackle. What I tried to do was put that over a calendar view for the next year to see where we may be able to to target different conversations. I don't view this as a set in stone calendar. I view this as we want to make sure we're making progress on the things we think are important, and if we need to each meeting move things around to really move things in, or if stuff happens at the council level that we need to react to, we might have to push stuff out. But again, this was my attempt at trying to put things out there more for discussion for this group to figure out, does this look right? And again, I would say it's very heavy loaded in the first 6 months, because that's where I just was starting to put stuff, but I know we're gonna have to like move things out. In my opinion, I kind of front loaded us though with some of the cost to serve stuff, because I feel like staff is ready with that work, and so that work is ready for discussion, so we can have a lot of those conversations early on. We talked a lot about reviewing our fiscal policy. Frankly, as I was looking at this again, preparing for this, I feel like we could really push out TIF stuff beyond what we have in here. I don't think it's urgent, so we could always move that out to post-budget and just do any TIF CEA work then. But again, as it related to policy, I was trying to make sure we were kind of plugging that in throughout the year so that we could take our time and really kind of dig in and have conversation. Councilor Cushing, do you have a comment?
I have a suggestion. I think that when I look at this, I say, one, this is really good. It's a lot of work. I'm amazed that you've digested this and from my perspective, captured it very accurately. And it's good enough. Let's get started. And as at each week, we can take a look at it and say, okay, are we still on track here, or you or any one of us ought to be able to say, hey, I think we ought to shift this, shift something around. But for right now, I think the important thing is that you really did a nice job capturing all of the stuff that came up at our last discussion. And let's get picking away at it. Was that brief?
Yes.
Karen?
Well, I know I had suggested the land reserve fund, which I don't see on here. About discussing that, because I know that they're gonna be looking for more funding. I keep looking and I'm not seeing that. And then I guess, but I know that we had also discussed about that because we have the open space plan coming, then I'm wondering if maybe that's why it's not on there, and we wanted to wait for the open space plan before we talked about how much they thought they should ask on the ballot for the land reserve fund.
I don't know why I didn't put that on there. That might just
Well,
be
and
an
it's just like, I
oversight.
see the sustainability reserve account, which is great, but that wasn't part of our goals, and I'm like, well, where's the one from our goals carrying over? And so again, it's very minor, but I do know that's an ask that's coming
Yeah.
from one of our committees.
Do you think they'll be ready by budget time to propose something, or what would there be? Would this likely more be a request that would be in the CIP for 2026 budget?
It's been suggested that they're coming sooner than later. Right or wrong, I don't recall ever having land bonds in the CIP,
Right.
typically because they've been advanced from an outside entity. We don't really initiate that.
And so again, it doesn't necessarily need to be part of the budget, right? Like it,
Not necessarily, it hasn't in the past.
so we can.
My guess is they'll be asking for as soon as this November. I think there seems to be some level of urgency given the number of very fruitful conversations that are well underway.
Right,
So
well,
that
and they're
was
also
just-
acknowledging our goals.
Yeah.
And
Right.
saying, if you guys want to accomplish these goals, you have to put more money in the fund. But I do know that part of the conversation was that we have the open space plan coming. And I do worry that it might be premature for us to go out and ask before we have that.
Yeah,
But obviously that was just one thing that stuck out to me.
but I think we can at least start to have that conversation as a committee and understand.
Because the committees are having them, like
Yeah.
the resident committees are already talking about what they think would be a reasonable number to ask for.
Are they talking with sustainability? Because I'm wondering if it could be a joint agenda item to talk about the reserve account and the land acquisition.
I feel like the sustainability ask is extremely different.
Mhm.
It's a very different type of thing where, this is like, we want to buy land to preserve. This is like, oh, I think the sustainability, these are the fund that people are applying to for things like that are benefit. I think it's a very different use of, that's taxpayer money for that. And what I'm discussing is, how can we support our goal with 30 by 30 by helping the land trust reserve fund figure out how much they should ask for.
And that the idea then is that we go back to the public for another bond
Mhm.
to
Correct.
fill up the fund so that they can buy up more.
And
land.
we don't have to discuss it, but this is one of our goals and we are supportive of 30 by 30. I personally think it is appropriate for us to at least have a conversation around
Sure.
why that ask is that ask, how much?
So my understanding is this bubbles up from outside, the Scarborough Land Trust, other people will come to us, to you.
That's the expectation.
And it seems to me that ought to drive the timing and that it would probably behoove them to let us know what their timeline and thinking was sooner than later, and then we can get it on the calendar and discuss it. So I kind of come back to where
It's come from a different number of angles, but Parks and Conservation Land Board, which is a body of the council of the town, appears to be the one taking the lead this time.
But that's not always
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Not always.
I actually think what we need to discuss at the council goal meeting is getting alignment that we are directing the parks and conservation land bond. I'm messing
Land
up
board.
the-
I'm
the
on it.
PCLB.
Yep.
And maybe this open space committee by such and such date to give us a recommendation on what we would want to go on ballot for in November for increasing the land bond.
We won't have it. We won't have an open space plan by that time, I don't think.
No.
But could we at least have the committee, can the committee help?
There will be a
to
committee together, yes.
Yeah.
opine on that at least? And-
I don't know that there's anyone has the crystal ball and can tell you,
Yeah.
it's as much a political consideration as anything. What
It's more Vetting what is palatable.
what can we,
do you
yeah,
think will
what
pass?
will our residents tolerate?
Mhm.
I think they can provide some data around rough estimates of active conversations they're having, like acquisition conversations to help ground that number, if you will.
Mhm.
I know there was some interest in perhaps surveying our community to get a better sense of where that appetite might be.
Mhm.
Perhaps we can add a question or two on a school survey that's going to be going out. I don't want to detract from that, but there will be an opportunity to receive input there.
This would be a good Counselor Corner Live
Yeah.
conversation too, for the future for,
Absolutely.
so let's put it on, for later in the year, just to make sure we don't lose sight of
I
it.
think that's, yeah, the point.
Yeah, and then we can also, I would suggest we also bring it up in the council goals to make sure we have a very specific goal, if that's something we want to push forward on.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna be proposing to continue 30 by 30, so I think this sort of falls in line with
Yeah.
that goal.
All right, so if you guys are good with it as is, and again, just knowing it's flexible and we'll move things, just looking at February, again, what we currently have in there is reviewing the cost to serve modeling, having a discussion on section 1 of our fiscal policy. We talked about the budget schedule, so we've done that one. And we've talked about Alger Hall, so we've done that, and we've done the revow. Or do we need another revow? More deeper dive with Nick? He's right there. Because we had originally had you plan to come for February, but do you still want to use some of that time to come and dig deeper with us? Or do you want to wait to see how the council workshop goes and then we can decide if?
Let's see the reception next
Okay.
week, whether you think you need.
I'm flexible though. We can discuss.
To the point of communication, it might be helpful to continue the conversation to really kind of really talk it through to make sure we get down to the bare essence of it. What are those bits and pieces that are the most important to communicate out?
Mhm.
And I think we probably struggle because we're too close to it. But having a more open discussion with others
Mhm.
will perhaps get us there.
Yep. I think it's good.
I'd be happy to help out because I'm a simple fellow and so if you want opinions, I got some.
Yeah. So we'll keep you penciled in for February for now. Again, for sure. All right, cool. All right, with that, I think the last item on our agenda is public comment. So is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on anything we talked about today or anything else? All right. So with that, I'm closing public comment.
Before we adjourn,
Yep,
can we talk about our meeting schedule?
yes.
Because I do have Community Services Rec Advisory Board from 6 to 7:30 right now. They actually have a guest there that I invited, and I'm not there.
Okay.
So I just didn't know, because typically finance last year was 90 minutes.
Mhm.
So, or is it going to be 2 hours moving forward? Because I think we'd have to change my schedule.
We can
or
try and
change the
target-
schedule.
I will try and target an agenda that's 90 minutes.
Okay.
Going forward.
Yeah.
I saw 5 to 7 on the calendar, so that's why when you brought that up, I didn't plan for 2 hours. I
Okay.
planned for 90 minutes,
Yeah.
but
That's
We're-
fine. I just
we're-
wanted to
we're learning.
clarify.
We need to manage expectations, and Murphy's laws will always employ here.
yeah,
You have the time, you'll fill it.
yeah. So we'll do 90 minutes. We'll target 90 minutes going forward. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Is that fine with you, Counselor
you.
Cushing?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? All right, thanks, everyone.